Hey friends, it's Yulia. Today I want to talk a little bit about my finished works in graphite, acrylic, and watercolor from when I first started to now. I thought this would be a good way to monitor my art progress and kind of see where I'm at myself, and also talk a little bit about how I started my own art journey. Let's do it. All right, let's take it back to where it first began in very late 2011. I actually have my works dated here, 12/27/2011. So this is Link from Zelda. I wanted to draw him because my boyfriend at the time was a big fan of the Zelda games, and I thought this reference photo was pretty cool, even though in hindsight it was actually a terrible reference photo because none of the lines were clear. That's kind of like how I drew them too. Like it was just not a good reference photo. But I just drew this on plain computer paper, got a little mechanical pencil, just plain number 2, whatever you use at school, and just drew this up. Next is the Skyrim logo. Skyrim came out on 11/11/2011, and I wanted to draw the logo again because my boyfriend at the time was very into Skyrim. I actually played along with him. Like I did all the lock picking challenges because I thought that was a lot of fun. But this varies very much in my style. It checks out. I love typography. I love this little dragon. It's all like silver and cool. Looking back, I should probably have actually like blended this out a little bit to get like that burnished metal effect. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. And this is New Year's Day of 2012, which is forever ago. Fast forward about 10 years later, and I was rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender in early 2021, and I wanted to draw the characters, and that was like the first really urge I had to draw something in the last 10 years because I was busy with school, had a lot going on, didn't really have a lot of time for drawing, and didn't make it a priority really. Even though I've always really enjoyed it, and actually both my parents, my dad went to vocational school for technical drafting, so he had a really nice educational background in technical drawing, and then my mom always enjoyed creative drawing as well, but I never really saw that growing up, and this is purely of my own interest that I actually got into drawing, even though both my parents also have an affinity for it. So I was watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I thought, the characters were so cute. I love anime. I've always enjoyed anime. I watched it probably since I was like 6. So I drew Ty Lee first on this little sketch pad that I bought. And I thought it was a really cute little character sheet. Like I love her little poses. I love her facial expressions. I just think she's adorable. So after that one, I'm like, why don't I just draw all the other Avatar characters? So I will show you how those turned out. So as you can see, this is Azula. And I actually bought Faber-Castell pencils. For this one, I got a range for, I think it's from like 8B to H maybe. Basically it's different values, so you can get a bunch of different tones. So this is my first time really trying that out. As you can see, I really did like the darker tones here to highlight some of the hair and really try out the pencils. So I had a lot of fun doing these Avatar characters. Here's Zuko playing with his fire. I actually recommend almost everyone should watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's definitely one of my favorite shows. There's a lot of life lessons, especially from this man, Uncle Iroh. He has a lot of good wisdom, a lot of things you can really pick up a lot more as an adult that he says, a lot of different great expressions, a lot of just good life wisdom. This is probably my least favorite one, how it turned out. And then Toph, she was one of the original characters back in the day who was shown with a disability on screen, which was pretty cool because she's blind and she uses that to her advantage actually for her earth bending. This is little Momo. I love this scene where he's doing like a little dance. So I wanted to draw it, and I loved how that one turned out. Of course, here's Aang. Little Momo is back here as well. Very cute. These are a lot of fun to draw. Our favorite cactus juice drinker. And then Katara. I actually really enjoy how this one turned out as well. I'm pretty happy with all of these, really, especially for like my first foray into drawing. But anime is actually really easy to get right because it's just, pretty easy lines. There's not really a lot of shadows. The color tones don't really change that much. It's really simplified, which makes it a lot easier to pick up. And I would always recommend to start with anime if you're trying to learn, basic anatomy, especially if it's like more lifelike. But I love this one because I love how her hair turned out. I love the motion. I love the water bending. And her expression, I think, is pretty good too for such a small scale drawing. So that's where it all really began. Avatar: The Last Airbender. After that, since I was home during COVID, I had a lot of access to different supplies. Had a bunch of like old acrylic paints, a little bit of watercolors, some canvases. So I kind of really explored and did whatever I wanted during that time. For example, I had this canvas sketch pad that I used watercolors on. I don't know how well you can see this. I'll add a picture if you can't. But as you can see, these are two SpaceX boosters landing at the same time. This was super, super exciting to watch. I'm a big fan of rockets, space travel. So I decided to depict this, but I did not have the right supplies on hand because this was just like a really thick canvas board that I put watercolor on. So it did not spread. It did not behave how watercolor should. And it kind of faded a little bit too. This is like the brightest it was here right at the start. But you live and you learn. Next, during this time, I also did some acrylic tutorials. So for example, there's this beautiful lavender fields tutorial that I wanted to try. I had a little canvas. So I just kind of explored and did whatever I wanted during this time. I even did these like paper, like geometric paper arts, because I actually did similar fruit art. I'll have to show those sometime. Those are a lot of fun. I even did woodworking. So I made this huge abstract mountain piece to hang in the basement. This is probably like 4 feet by 3 feet. But that was my first time using a circular miter saw. And I just kind of eyed it and didn't really measure the angles after I got the frame done. But I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out. At this point in time, I was getting very into art, mostly because I didn't have anything else to do during COVID. And I ordered myself a Micron pen, which I was very excited about. It was such an extravagant purchase. No, it's like $2 maybe. But I wanted to get a really nice ink pen, and this was my first ink project. I actually found this in a old botany notebook from like early 1900 maybe. So I wanted to recreate this on nice paper. Next was a little more successful of a foray into watercolor. As you can see, I was still very excited about my ink. So I made the Parthenon. This is actually based on my own reference photo that I took when I was in Greece. I made the Parthenon in ink. I really worked on my perspective on that one. All the columns were kind of a lot of work. And I wanted to have like a little more of a dreamier, like surrealist vibe. And I did not achieve that in how these watercolors turned out. As you can see, the colors were a little bit heavy-handed, and it was just like not the effect I was looking for. I was hoping for a little bit more dreamy, a little bit more like the Parthenon's floating in the clouds kind of vibe. Next was this watercolor piece. This is Falcon 9 Chan. So this is, again, SpaceX. This is the Falcon 9, the rocket, as a anime girl. I'm actually very, very happy with how the galaxy turned out behind her, but is really messy, a little bit heavy-handed. It's just not as neat as I wanted it to be, but I'm happy with how the sky and the galaxy turned out, and I think it's nice for a beginner's attempt at watercolor. I was still working through my acrylics, and we got a new puppy at this time. Her name is Storm. She was a COVID puppy, and of course we still have her. But this is a portrait of acrylic puppy Storm. It's okay. It's not my favorite, mostly because the tones of the blacks were difficult to get, and I was kind of lazy into mixing different shades, because with acrylics, the paint dries out and you can't use it again. So you kind of had to do it all in the same day. And it's also pretty wasteful if you mix more than you will actually use, and it just kind of sits there and dries, which I didn't really like. So I'm like, oh, I'll just stick it to like as little tones as I can. So it ended up being not quite what I was hoping for, but I kind of mixed it in there with some like lighter grays to mix up the black. But she's an all black dog, which is not the easiest thing to paint, I realized after I started on this project. But this still hangs in her own little like mudroom space. She has her own official portrait, which I'm pretty happy about. And then the other acrylic project I did was this abstract sunset. I quite like how this one turned out, and again, there's not that much variation. I was very, very excited to order palette knives, and this is my first palette knife project. As you can see, I was super excited into getting like the square blocky shape of the palette knife and getting that texture that I was really looking for. And this is for my parents' bedroom because I thought the colors worked really well, and I really actually enjoy making custom art for specific spaces. Happy with how it turned out, my first abstract acrylic project. And then this next one's a little bit out of order because I made this probably I'd say a year after these previous ones that I talked about, but I only have a picture of it because I handed it to a friend because it was for a friend. But I made this USS Laffy anime picture watercolor, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out because it's really colorful. It looks like it could be from like an anime comic, which is what the style I was going for. I like the colors, and the ink looks really nice as well. And that was like my first time drawing like machinery, because she has this like, I don't know, gun thing. So that was kind of fun. It was kind of fun to draw, you know, a little more anime style and actually color it, because coming from these like avatar pieces, it's very similar like backgrounds, but actually coloring it and adding a little bit more depth and dimension to it was a lot of fun. As you can kind of tell based on those pieces, and when I was starting my art journey, I kind of did whatever I wanted. I did not know any of the rules. I did not go to school for art. So the rules didn't apply to me because I didn't know them. For example, making mistakes like using watercolor on a solid canvas board, and then just doing random stuff like woodworking, acrylic tutorials, like my own acrylic abstract stuff. I really had that mentality that I can do anything, and I think I still kind of carry that along with me, that there are no boundaries that can contain me. But I actually had a small sketchbook during this time as well, where I was kind of working through some ideas, a couple more like graphite portraits, and I'll show that in a video at some point later once I actually finish it, because I think that's interesting to see as well, in addition to the finished pieces, what kind of stuff I was sketching. And also during this time, the art was not a super consistent part of my life. I'd say I was drawing maybe like once every 2 weeks. I was doing like an acrylic paint project like on a Saturday morning or something when I didn't have anything else to do. So I think just developing more consistency and doing art more regularly, it really helped push me to get better. Also at this point, I thought I should actually learn some fundamentals of art, because I'm doing all this stuff and I'm getting better, which I thought was gonna happen. I'm like, well, the more I do it, the more I'll get better. But I thought to get better faster, I should actually learn some fundamentals and figure out, why I should be doing something a certain way, or maybe being able to like draw a human without having a reference, or I draw a portrait like straight from my own imagination. Like, you know, that's where like the fundamentals would really come and help me. So I kind of really started searching for a curriculum online at this time to kind of see what kind of knowledge there is out there in the internet, consolidate it, and come up with a plan for myself so I can actually learn the fundamentals and get better at the art. At this point in time, it's about probably around mid 2021, and I wanted to get a little bit more into watercolors. So I started out with one of the harder things to do, which is to paint skin. So I did this portrait of Rihanna because I loved her look at the Met Gala, and I mean, it's okay. It's okay. I wasn't like super happy with it at the time, and I'm not super happy with it now. Mostly because it's just a little bit heavy-handed, a little bit not quite as focused as I want it to be. So for example, like as you can see, there's like a little bit of a mess here because I incorporated like gold pens, silver pens into this like beautiful headpiece. I like how her hair turned out. I still think it could have been more obvious that there's like sun shining in the back of her head and like on her entire backside. But it's okay. Profile is also not the easiest angle to draw. So I think it's just okay. But this kind of gave me the inspiration for my next series, which was the Fairies series. So the Fairies series was one of my first actual planned collections. So I did 3 different pieces. I want to do more, but I did 3 different pieces, and this was a lot of fun because this was my first time combining references into one thing. So I looked up a bunch of references for wings, I looked up a bunch of references for flowers, for the pose, and the face. And the idea came to me from having a couple. I still follow a bunch of photographers and models from my previous fashion modeling gigs, so I knew this model. I love this photo because this photographer is one of my favorites, and I wanted to recreate it, and I thought it'd be really, really, really beautiful as a magical fairy since I'm into a lot of fantasy books. So I drew her with purple hair. I actually love how this purple flower turned out. I think that's really, really nice. I had a cool reference photo. The only thing I'm not the happiest with is the wings. You might be able to kind of tell, but it's metallic. I use metallic silver watercolor paint, but I wanted to be a little bit more whimsical, a little bit more translucent. So it just didn't really hit the mark on that point. The next one is this British Vogue cover that I also drew into the Fairy series, but I love like the little balloony, like ball head hair things. That was really cool. I love the blue and the oranges since those are complementary colors. And yeah, this one's just all right too. Again, the wing can use a little work. And then this next one is Lexi. I drew her with blue hair because I thought that would suit her quite a bit with the yellow dress. I kind of changed the shape of the dress too to be a little bit more like tulip shaped, so it kind of looks like she's like, like made her clothes out of flowers. And again, I'm not the happiest with the wings, but I think it's all right. But I really like the pose, and I really enjoy kind of like the whimsical look that she has. I think it'll make the most sense to group these somewhat by category, mostly chronological order, but also kind of grouping by topic/type of art. So let's dive into the next one. And that is Elaine from The Wheel of Time. So this was before the actress was announced who will play Elaine in season 2 of The Wheel of Time. I am a big fantasy book nerd, as I mentioned earlier. So I wanted to try my hand at drawing what I think Elaine looked like based on the book description. I'm pretty happy with how this portrait turned out. I think what I would change is not doing it on watercolor paper because it is a little bit grittier. And also adding a little bit more wave to her hair because in the books she has reddish blonde, very wavy hair. And this is just like a light wave, so I just angled it as, she smoothed it down for maybe like a state dinner. So I'm pretty happy with this one, and I based this off a portrait of one of my friends. Relatedly, The next Wheel of Time piece is this Aes Sedai painting from the introduction of the show of season 1 of Wheel of Time. I loved the motifs here. I love the metallic gold and silvers. And I also had a lot of fun making this like cloud type smoky effect in watercolor. I love the metallic details here. I think it turned out very, very nicely. And I wanted to do the rest of them in the introduction video as well, but I just have not had the chance to. Okay, so the next section is the abstract works of mine. This is the very first try that I had for an abstract piece. I just sat down and wanted to create something colorful, but it ended up looking like this was crayon. That was not my intent. When one color blends into another color, that's kind of what I was going for here. Like for example, this like red goes into the orange, maybe like these like blues and greens here, but it ended up looking like I just scribbled with crayon. But yeah, it's all right. It's still a cool piece, and it was a lot of fun to make. So maybe there will be more in the future of this style. And again, I was really, really loving the metallic gold paints at this juncture in my art career. And this is actually based on a shot of the Amazon River from the space station. I really, really liked how the river kind of snaked through the landscape. And I kind of trying to make like an abstract like blues and greens, even though it was mostly just like a really dark green in the satellite photo. But I like how this one turned out. It's still a little bit clunkier than I would like. I'd hope that there would be a little bit more, I guess, depth to the gold tone. But overall, it's all right. And I like the style. And again, I really like the space motifs and just keeping things from nature is where I get a lot of my inspiration, and I like to paint the abstract pieces from that. This is another simple abstract piece. This was also a lot of fun to make, these overlapping just simple monochromatic shapes. It's actually it was more difficult to lay this out than I thought it would be in terms of where everything should go to make a cohesive image on a page. But I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It's actually a really nice break from drawing something more realistic style, just to have something pretty simple and still turn out well. And again, I like the ink as well. I was intentionally going for like the faded ink lines instead of very deep, or just, you know, like really, really solid one line. So that was the intent. It turned out how I wanted to. And I want to keep a little bit more of these, which is actually what the next piece is another iteration of this type of style. So this is my most recent abstract piece. As you can see, I went a little bit farther with the ink on this one, and then the watercolors as well are a lot more colorful. I kind of really enjoyed the serendipity of the loose style of the watercolors with a little bit more like rigidity of the ink. Again, I really enjoy watercolor and ink together, so this is of no surprise, but it was a lot of fun to bust out my pens to go on top of the watercolor, which was already pretty abstract and colorful, and I'm really hoping to do more of this style in the future. This next piece is a direct copy of an artist that I like, Humid Peach, on Instagram. I just wanted to practice my watercolors. I really like this portrait. I didn't post this anywhere because this is just a direct, like basically a copycat. But I really liked how she laid out her colors. I really liked the image itself. I thought it was pretty interesting. So this was just a practice piece to try to get better at my tones and my shapes and my portrait work. And here it is. First to be seen in the light of day, my own version of this painting. This next one is one of my favorites. This is my own D&D character, Delta Suntree. I made watercolor paintings of our entire D&D party. This was a lot of fun. I still have a ton of photos on my phone saved of like medieval armor, like how should a belted bag look on a person, elf, creature, fantasy creature, whatever you want to call it. You know, how should a cloak look? How should like certain medieval weaponry look in hand versus like, you know, like being like mid swing. So that was a lot of fun to research, but also a ton of work to try to get that aspect right, just to make sure that, you know, what I'm drawing is accurate. I think that's important when I'm drawing, you know, characters as people describe them to me, because that was kind of like my first like commission type pieces where I had members of my D&D party, you know, tell me what they wanted to see. For example, for the Loxodon, he wanted 2 purple psychic knives in his, you know, in his elephant's hand. So I'm like, okay, what should that look like? You know, what does a purple psychic knife look like? So kind of translating what was in my head, or I guess translating the vision of the commissioner to commissioner, translating the vision of the commissioner into an actually finished product. So Delta was my first one that I did because she's my own, so I'm like, I can practice on her. I can make her as many times as I want, and I think she turned out pretty cute. And then also in a similar style, but a piece that is kind of completely different than what I've done before, is this more illustration type piece of this kind of like a fantasy storybook setting. I kind of wanted it to look a little bit like a children's novel, of this cat happily wandering on top of this fence post in front of this like cottagey looking house. I kind of like how it turned out. I think the only thing is that my colors were a little bit too bright, but then again, since I was going for a really happy kind of like children's storybook tone with the ink and the watercolors, I don't think it was too bad. But this was actually my first original piece. Again, I put it together through the use of many, many references. I'm pretty proud of how this one came together, especially since this cat looks a little bit like my cat at home. So I was just imagining, you know, like a very warm, happy scene of this cat, you know, like looking up into the ray of sun and just kind of like basking in it in front of this very cute little cottagey house. And this was actually the first time I tried this abstract sky effect, where you can see like little splatters and it's kind of not exactly a realistic looking sky. And then adding the ink here as well to kind of bring in the focus that you're kind of standing right under a tree and the sun's coming through the leaves, and kind of illuminating the leaves and making them a little bit more yellow. This next one is one I put a lot of hours into. This is Jupiter from a photo from space. I don't think the colors are as realistic as they probably are in real life, but I loved how bright it was. I loved, you know, the storms brewing. I loved like all these little patterns, and just nature again is super inspirational for me. And making this out of watercolor, I thought was a bold choice in retrospect, since there is so much detail work. From farther away, kind of really, you know, gives a nice effect of a lot of stuff going on. But once you zoom in, you can really see all the little lines and all the paints that I put in there, all the different tones. And I actually used a little bit of white pen as well to kind of give a little bit more depth and the illusion of a little bit more colors. I'm happy with how this one turned out. I haven't like found a really good use for it anywhere, so it's just been sitting with the rest of my finished works. But maybe I'll make a print of this one at some point. Oh yeah, on this one I forgot to add is that this sky is technically supposed to be all black. This is supposed to be all shadow, but the watercolor set I had at this time did not have a very strong black. It was kind of just like a purplish blue dark tone. So this is already layered probably around like 10 times to create these shadows. I'm like, if I work this anymore, I feel like this paper is not strong enough to hold it. So I kind of wish I would have, you know, maybe do it with a little bit of a darker tone, but it also kind of softens the look, I think, to have the sky and the galaxy, the bluish purples that I did make them. Okay, time for the acrylic section. This is the first acrylic I've made on paper and not canvas. And as you can kind of see here, this paper is not the best quality, because I put painter's tape on top of this paper and it ripped off half of it. Like I can literally see that it's thinner here than it is here, where it like did not rip off quite as much. But as for the painting itself, this is Malibu. This is from my own reference photo of Malibu, and I wanted to do a kind of an abstract, colorful sky. And this bottom bit is also a little bit abstract in terms of these flowers were mostly dark yellow, but I wanted to add a little bit more pinks to them to kind of bring in the sky. I think this isn't too bad for my kind of like first actual acrylic painting, not counting my other like practice ones that I showed in the past. But again, it's a little bit sloppy, like the tones aren't quite what I want them to be, and I had to redo the sky a couple different times because it was not turning out how I wanted to. And then the tones of like the blues here, I don't really like how they kind of clash with the cobalts here. Again, I think it's okay, and acrylic is a lot of fun to work with, but I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, especially working on paper instead of canvas, and hopefully I'll get a little bit higher quality paper for my acrylic work. So this is the next acrylic work that I did. This is from, again, my own reference photo of a scene I took in Iowa. I wanted to convey the open space. I wanted to convey this beautiful dusk that was going on. I wish the sky was a little bit darker. I couldn't get quite the right tone that I wanted to. But I like how this bit turned out. It's just like a beautiful, like pink stripe going through the sky, which I really, really liked in this picture. And then this, I'm actually really happy with how this turned out, because this should technically be all black, but you would definitely not be able to see what is it called? The metal rods of the windmill if I didn't add the white paints on top of the black metal. I think that was clever, and I like how it turned out. I like how it kind of brings it together with the outside of the painting, and I feel like it makes it look a little bit more cinematic, so to say. But my least favorite part about this painting is the grass. I think there's a lot of room to improve here, since there's a ton of like dirt patches and it wasn't very even grass in the first place. But I don't know, I guess it's just like the foreground, whereas the sky and the windmill are the main focal points, so it doesn't need to have anything special to it. But I think just having, I don't know, just a little something else will kind of add a little bit more to this piece. But I think it's all right as is, and I'm happy to keep improving on my acrylic work. With the acrylics in general, I'm really gravitating toward more abstract landscapes based on reference photos that I took myself. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I think it's just the right medium to convey, just put a little bit of a different twist to the actual photo and convey more of the emotion and the colors that I saw myself and felt, versus as watercolor, it might not be quite the same medium, just to kind of make it exactly how I wanted to. Alrighty, now time for a flurry of little watercolor paintings. I worked on these through the late, probably June, July, August, probably only August of summer of 2022. And I have a whole stack of these, so I won't linger on any single one too long. But I'll kind of highlight some of my favorites and what I like and what I don't like about these. Oh, for reference, these are all of my favorite locations from either video games, books, movies, TV shows, just kind of anything that was important to me growing up, or maybe nowadays. I kind of wanted to memorialize it in this little, it used to be like a little table, like table marker. So people would be like, okay, table Champions Field. But I cut them in half, and now they're great as bookmarks. So first one, Champions Field. So I actually really like how these white flames turned out with the pen on the inside. Next one is Hogwarts. Again, the people are super simplified, but I think the castle and the overall feel and the vibe of the scene, you can definitely tell it's Hogwarts. This is from The Witcher. This is the Duchy of Toussaint. Again, very simplified. This actually ended up being one of my favorites, even though it is one of the more monotone pieces. I love how the ink turned out on the actual Minas Tirith fortification. And then the mountains, just kind of like a vague impression in the background. I think this one's super cool. I struggled a little bit on forks. These trees are not number one, and the fog going through them is a little bit harder to notice. But forks is definitely a very important place for my childhood, as I reread Twilight probably, I think, every single summer. This is from The Wheel of Time again. You'll probably notice a common theme here, that a lot of my art takes inspiration from a lot of fantasy books that I read. I like how this one turned out. Oh, this boat bled. It's supposed to be red just like this one, but it must have been too wet, or maybe I got a drop of water on it. But I think this one's cute too, especially for such a small scale, to make the city look believable. I'm happy with how that one turned out. Again, we are still in the Wheel of Time universe, and the Two Rivers, this is based on the show version of Two Rivers. I always imagined the Two Rivers as more like plains, and that definitely describes them as mountainous. But this is definitely from the show. I like how little buildings were portrayed. This is kind of like the main town square, and this is the inn. This, I'm sure a lot of you will recognize, is King's Landing from Game of Thrones. I really love how the blue and the orange here work together. Again, from Avatar, where it all began in my art journey. This is the Eastern Air Temple. I added gold pen here, and you can kind of see that it's a little bit reflective. But I like how it turned out. I think it's cute. Again, from Avatar. I also really enjoy the tones of this one. I love the purpley sky. Kind of added that as my own effect to kind of bring it all together to different shades. Again, from The Witcher, I added a little bit of purple to the sky, these little Viking boats, castle in the background. Beautiful. This is probably the most simple one. This is Goldenrod City from Pokemon. And I mean, not much you can do here with a 2D city. So here you go. Oh, this one I actually made this myself. I didn't have a reference to go off of. This is from the Waystone Inn in the Kingkiller Chronicles. This is where Quoth runs his inn. This is the main bar, and I kind of made this up in terms of like the little polished glasses, the bottles, like the candles, and the sword above the bar is described in the book, so that is definitely true to the book. But again, this is kind of my own illustration and interpretation of that one. This one ended up being my least favorite because the actual Rivendell is so detailed and so beautiful that I feel like this did not live up to that justice, and I did not have enough time to put into making it as detailed and as beautiful as I needed to. This is Whiterun from Skyrim, and the colors are a little bit more vibrant than they are in actual Skyrim, but I think it's all right. I like the little cobble roofs and the tree. I think it's also nice. Ooh, I think this is also one of my favorites. This is Elsmera from Aragon. It is an elven city. I tried to kind of convey some of that magic in terms of like the detail and the ironwork, and this is actually like the wood is bent and made into these buildings and houses, and which is, I think, is super cute, super unique. I made little hearts in the windows to make it very cute. And yeah, this is from Aragon, one of my favorite childhood series that I read when growing up. The movie does not exist, so this is straight from the books. This is from Mistborn. This is Allendale. This is just a city map, kind of looking top down into the city. There's definitely a scene I want to make from Mistborn of Vin and Kelsier jumping from the rooftops in the mist, which is super like cinematic, super beautiful, but that is not enough space to do it on a small scale like this, and I did not have enough time to do that as well. So I just decided to do like a little map overview of the city instead. And last but not least is Firelink Shrine. This is from Dark Souls, and I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. I like the colors. I like the greens, blues, purples, and also with the bonfire right in the middle with the nice warm tones, and also the cobblestone in terms of the archways looks really nice as well on the small scale. Yeah. This little series was definitely a test of my watercolor skills, since I tried to get all of these done within a timeline of about, I don't know, maybe a month. And it definitely took me way longer than I thought it would, just in terms of getting the references, in terms of getting the sketches, and then actually painting it itself, letting it dry. I was working probably like 5 or 6 at a time, just waiting for one to dry, working on the next one, using the same green tones or like the same blue sky tones from one piece to another when I was working on them. And it's definitely a lot of fun. I don't think I would do it again in terms of such a rushed production, but I'm happy with how it turned out. And yeah, a good test of my watercoloring abilities. And then this ended up being one of my favorite portraits of the year. I made this in actually November of 2022. I tried to make this for Halloween, but I just didn't have enough time. But I love how this one turned out. This is again based on a model reference that I already had saved in my phone. And then making these little detailed pieces was a ton of fun in terms of like the lace and adding the white highlights to the hair. I like how the pumpkin turned out quite a bit. So that was kind of like the vibe, just like a bored witch, you know, waiting for whatever, like maybe her cauldron to get done cooking. So I changed up the colors of her hair. I thought that worked nicely with the leaves and the pumpkins, and I really like the fall vibes for this one, so it kind of encouraged me to do a little bit more seasonal type drawings that are just for fun. Again, another portrait. You guys have already seen this one in my previous YouTube video. I'm just okay with how it turned out. I love the monochrome. I think the blue itself is really, really nice in terms of the tone. The accuracy of the likeness, I think, could use a little bit more work. I looked back at it again, and I'm like, ugh, like probably should have just like changed up a couple of things to make it a little bit more realistic to what she actually looks like. But as a standalone portrait, I think it was a lot of fun to explore just doing it all in one color. And I'm, generally happy with how it turned out. And last but not least is my last series of watercolor cities. So I started off with this one. This is again based on my own reference photo of Cinque Terre, and I wanted to get like a whimsical depiction of what the city was like. I took a lot of creative liberties in terms of like this cobblestone definitely does not exist in the actual city. There's a bunch of tables, there's a bunch of tourists, of course, that I did not depict. And this was my first try at perspective in terms of a cityscape in watercolor. The sketch itself was a ton of fun to make. And then I was just kind of trying to figure out how to fill in the blank space. So I filled it in with the with the cobblestones to kind of give a little bit of an interesting effect. And then added like these lanterns and added a little bit of detail in terms of like the iron railings and just kind of giving it a little bit more detail and pop. I like how the sky turned out too, even though it's a little bit hard to tell with it blending into the white outline. But again, this is my first watercolor city, and I'm happy to keep going on this series. I really, really enjoy it. So next is, I think, my favorite piece to date is this watercolor and ink of Florence. Again, based on my own reference photo that I took while in Florence. I really love the whimsy of this one. I love the water, how it turned out. I love the bushes and the ivy. The only part I'm a little bit suspect about is this, because it was green hills. Like it was very kind of like mountainous terrain right here. Now I don't think that's depicted quite as well as I wanted to, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. I like the splatters for the sky. And then you can also actually tell, that this is a road, and the buildings are getting farther away from you, which again comes from my 250 box experience of getting the perspective right and moving toward this vanishing point, and then these buildings are moving this way. Again, I'm happy with how this one turned out, and I made another one based on this style, this time of Ortese in Italy. And I think this is my best work in terms of getting a 3D feel. Like, I love how this dome turned out. Wait, I forgot to fill in this little bit. I forgot to fill in the top of the church with gold. Okay, I guess it's not actually done, but I will talk about it like it is done. Pretend you didn't see that. But I really like how these little flower pots turned out. I took some creative liberties in terms of adding the shadows because there's actually a building right here. But I thought that would be too much and would draw attention away from this beautiful church. So I just kind of make the church the focal point and then added the blues for the shadows to kind of complement and tie in the sky a little bit better. So there you have it. And I'm hoping to continue this watercolor cities series since I've been really enjoying making these and having a lot of fun working through them. As you can see here, from this first one to these next ones, like the style gets much looser and much more whimsical, which is exactly what I'm going for. I'm trying to kind of open up and make it a little bit more abstract. Just to give the pieces a little bit more rather than just recreating a photorealistic painting. So I'm happy with how these are going, and I'm hoping to continue doing a little more of these. And there you have it. That is basically it. So from 2021 to 2023, those have been my finished pieces. Of course, I do have a sketchbook. I actually have a sketchbook and a half. And I will do a sketchbook tour on those once I actually finish those. I only have probably 10% left on each one, but I don't draw enough to be constantly making new sketchbooks. I have one piece in progress that I'm also very excited about. It is that portrait of Jinx from Arcane that you guys have probably already seen me working on. And yeah, I'm really happy I decided to film this video. I think it's gonna be a ton of fun to look back on this in maybe a year or two, or even 5 to 10 years, and see where I was, where I started, what my art style looked like, what my pieces looked like, and my own reactions to them, and kind of see where I end up and where my style takes me. So thank you all for joining me on this journey. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know what piece was your favorite, because it's really curious for me to see what I like versus what other people like, because I know what I changed, and I know how it looked while I was working on it, and maybe I wasn't such a fan of it, but other people might love it. So yeah, let me know in the comments what your favorite piece was, and hopefully I will see you again soon. Thank you again. Bye.